reason we don't step out of the comfort zone is because we'll be mocked, you know. A video will be posted of us online, and then next thing you know, we're humiliated online, laughed at, shunned, you know, and that's the worst thing, to be shunned by the crowd. Now you can be shunned by someone who doesn't even know you, thousands of miles away. And I've seen it, you know, I've seen a lot of people take the piss out of people like me who are willing to give things a go. You know, and I am grateful that being an autistic lad who has additional needs, I've tried things, at least, you know, I can say I've given life a go if you want. But I have, and I didn't just spend all day, every day indoors doing nothing, and that would have been very convenient for me because I had such crippling anxiety, and I still do, you know. This year's been fucking tough. There's been a lot of death, you know, there's been a lot of death. Disappointment, you know, I thought a new relationship was starting and it wasn't. So I'm sad about that, you know. And it feels like the days have been dragging by, you know. And when you're depressed, that's what it feels like. Everything goes really slowly. You know, when I look at it, it's only been like 2 months, but it feels like an entire year. There's been a lot of stuff like self-reflection and looking at things in depth that I didn't want to, and accepting, you know, this is not working for you. And I ask myself a lot, you know, because a lot of people talk about relationships that have failed, and for me they've never even started, you know, they haven't really gotten off the ground. It's not for lack of trying. And I don't believe in, you know, being with someone if you don't have a connection with them, and I've talked about that before. Last night I was up, you know, thinking about relationships that could have been and really dwelling on them, you know. I was struggling to get to sleep at first. I've been sleeping loads lately. I've been fucking exhausted. I was afraid of them working out, you know. I was trying because that's what you do, you know. Of course you want to have a girlfriend and all, but I was actually terrified when someone said yes. I was just like, oh fuck, now they're gonna see the real me. You know what I mean? And I hate that about myself. I fucking hate it. I hate the fact that I'm so anxious and lacking in confidence. You know, that real avoidant type of style. Look at this though, just before I start crying. Check this out. River is Justin Bieber says, this has gotten even bigger. The mouth of it's gotten huge. Wouldn't have gotten across it yesterday, and I definitely won't get across it today. But it looks cool, and I appreciate it. Deadly looking. Ooh, I love it. He's out to sea. But it makes me look at myself and think, am I fundamentally flawed? And I've never been a very confident person, unfortunately, you know. I've always needed reassurance, and you can't undo that very suddenly, unfortunately, you know. I'm anxious in situations that aren't even threatening, so imagine if I'm in a threatening situation, the levels of anxiety. And instead of avoiding them, I've pushed through them with maladaptive tendencies. You know, just trying to get along and live my life. You know, it just feels like a kick in the teeth, it really does. And going back to a point that I was making earlier, at what point do you start to say everyone's struggling, relationships are breaking down? At what point do you start thinking, okay, but that's no fucking use to me, because then you find yourself wishing bad on other people. Not necessarily wishing bad on other people, but that it kind of is. You're looking for reassurance that you're not alone. Do you know what I mean? It's not wishing for people to fail, but hearing that people have struggled makes you feel not as alone. And in a world where everyone is trying to show how perfect they are, how strong they are, which, like, I mean, on my social media, I could look like the party guy with all the girls, which I never thought I'd say. You know, because I've got pictures with loads of different girls, and sadly, a lot of them were very fake. A lot of them were not good friends. And that's the reality of it, you know, and I always aim to be honest. That's what I'm doing. Which is harder to do. But we're only going to get somewhere if we're all honest. I'm very suspicious of people who've never failed in their lives according to themselves. You know, don't associate yourself with people like that who always put your failures down and say, well, you just got to be tougher and man up or whatever. Because yeah, this life is not easy, but throwaway advice like that is useless to anyone. And you are who you surround yourself with, and I've come to learn that. But it feels very hard to take yourself away from it. I don't know why that is, but you don't have to be around anybody, and that means family as well. I chose not to be around toxic family only recently at a big event, because I knew it would have triggered me to drink. A funeral, you know, it's a big trigger for a lot of people. I know it would have been for me, because the last time I drank heavily, I went on a date after a funeral. Weird one. You know, it feels like the world's just getting more and more fucked up every year. I talk about the 90s and the noughties. You know, when you see people looking back nostalgically, geez, every Tom Cruise film that comes out, Top Gun and Mission Impossible, they're all really playing off the old films, aren't they? Do you ever notice that? They keep giving you throwbacks to better times. Because we're all suffering now and times feel shit, you know, there's no nostalgia. There's no movie stars, you know. Presidents have become laughing stocks, you know. It's a hard thing to describe. Like, I watch a lot of people who are from a different generation, so they've actually gone out and lived the life. And then I guess I feel less capable because I haven't done all the things they've done, but a lot of people my age haven't. And even though I know that social media is terrible for comparison, still fucking do it. You know, I try to stay off Instagram now as often as possible. I watch YouTube videos, like, quite often, you know. I'll listen to a video when I'm doing dishes or on the toilet. How many of us do that? It's probably how I've gotten a few new subscribers. But yeah, it is a tough time. And I see a lot of my friends who, you know, were trapped in pretty miserable relationships, and they just do it because it's convenient sex, whereas I was never really into that. I always believed that I should have a connection with someone before we make that commitment. You know, it's always seemed like something that should have more meaning to it for me. You know, casual hookups have never been my thing, because it just feels like you're wasting time and energy on something that's not even going to last. You know, and I feel like I have grown as a human and as a person. I've dated, you know, I have worked on myself. You know, from that extremely anxious kid who couldn't talk to people. Look how many people I'm talking to, but I was watching another video, Habits V2 from Kevin O'Hara. He's back in Ireland, by the way. Where are you, Kev? It's an alcohol-free lifestyle video. And he was saying, you know, if you go back and change anything in the past, you'll alter your future, you know. If only I could go back, and if only. I know where he's coming from. You know when the Simpsons are doing a video and Homer's dad, Abe, says to him, when you go back in time, don't step on anything. Just want to show you this view of the sea right now. Class. Amazing. But that's kind of what Kevin was getting at, I think, was you don't know that if you hadn't done something, that the future wouldn't be different, you know. Basically what I'm saying is, you think if this bad thing hadn't happened, then everything would be perfect now. A lot of struggles that I've had are the reason that I'm able to communicate as well as I can today. Whereas if I'd chosen to just stay away from it and avoid, I never would have had to develop those skills. Like if I hadn't gotten the jobs that I've gotten, and you know, gone through a lot of highly stressful situations, like in kitchens and building sites and whatever. Even though I fucking hated it, I had to develop social skills so that when you're in less threatening type of environments, you're much better, because you're like, well, this isn't as bad as the other one. I'm much more relaxed, so I can talk more openly now. Do you know what I mean? You learn to persevere. Another one for me is like when I think of rugby, I think, oh, I wish I never fucking played. Because me and my brother have this big thing around concussion, you know. We've gotten a lot of knocks to the head, a lot of injuries, and I'm worried that's fucked me up, you know. Because I was one of those players that was involved in lots of collisions, so was my brother. We were thrown in the deep end when we were too young, and that can contribute to depression, but it can also contribute to early onset dementia, which, I mean, I guess is still a big fear of mine. But rugby taught me the importance of teamwork, but it also taught me that everyone on the pitch is equal, and I thrived in that environment. It gave me more self-confidence that, you know, a lot of these lads who are mouthing off, they're not really big bollocks. You know, when they've got all their mates with them, they're great, but what can they do when the chips are down? Not a whole lot. That gave me the confidence to go and stand up for myself, you know. But it also taught me that I don't have to do that for the rest of my life and play rugby if I don't want to. You know, that's hard. But I often think as well, what would I have done if I didn't have rugby? Because there would have been a huge void there, and I was getting into a lot of trouble at that stage, so I had something to channel my negative energy into, which meant that I didn't get in as many fights with people. You're allowed fighting rugby within reason, and that was a good thing. And I've only stopped playing fully recently, late March. And it did give me an avenue to channel all my pent up frustration and aggression. Especially through school, you know, in the school years I needed something like that. If I didn't have that, I wouldn't have won Player of the Year twice. You know, and getting that award meant something to me. It was only small, yeah, but it was felt huge to me because I got something to say, this is what I contributed in school, and, you know, I'll be remembered for it, hopefully. But I've also done a lot of things to please other people and to make other people happy. And, you know, where family's concerned, I don't mind doing that. You know, I always wanted to make my mum happy, my dad, make sure my brother was okay for money. It's time to look after me now. You know, I've neglected myself for far too long. Far too long. But another point that I was making about friends, I had a lot of bad friends, you know, a lot of groups that have fizzled out. You know, some is my own fault, I will take responsibility for that 100%. But an old friend of my brother's texted me, you know, and he wasn't great to my brother, I don't think. A lot of people weren't, when he was going through a hard time. you know, people hanging out with those who were giving him a hard time, but supposedly my brother's friends contacting me, and I'm like, yeah, you know what, I'm not arse getting back to you. You know, fuck you. If confidence isn't instilled in you as a kid, you just don't have it. You only know what the world around you teaches you. And like, I've met loads of different friends from loads of different friend groups, like school, rugby, from college. You know, I've met people from all different walks of life and situations. It just feels like so many people let you down. So many people came by when it was convenient for them. And it's like, I was always taught, which I do think is important to look after number one. You know, my dad particularly gave me that advice. And you know, he can be a bit selfish, but I do think he's right in that sense. You know, you're not there to babysit anyone. People have to stand on their own two legs and fend for themselves in a lot of ways. Plus, when I look at it, I was in no fucking position to look after myself, never mind anyone else. You know, you always come at this from a lens of, you know, I had no issues and I was doing fine, so I should have looked after other people. I was a fucking mess. Still fucking am. But I was a basket case. You know, miserable, so depressed. My teenage years were miserable. Very messy. Barely had the energy to make it into school every day. You know, mixing antidepressants with drugs and alcohol. Crying out for help. It's taken too long to get the proper help, but you know, I'm getting there now, and don't lose hope, guys, is what I say to you. You know, it is tough out there, 100%. When I started this channel, I was just hoping that I'll give you all a bit of hope. Do you know what I mean? Which is obviously true. Greg, you've been saying it. Rather than tuning into the news, you like to watch me down here. And I appreciate that. That means the world to me, you know. Robin Woodbury as well. We're getting round 2 of the podcast going next week. Fingers crossed. But I'll send you an email about that. Looking forward to that, you know. It's the unknown, you know, that's the big issue. Don't know what's going to happen. Chopping and changing with pills, you know, GP visits and counsellor appointments. You kind of feel like, you know, I've done a lot of these courses and different classes and everything, but now I want to get better. You know, I was up on the grass playing with my brother the other day, and Alfie, you know, just throwing the ball around, and I was dizzy, you know, I was very tired, and I started thinking, fuck, is this medication doing this to me? Because it didn't, like, I'm not very fit necessarily, you know, I'm fit enough, you know, fitter than I have been, but I was out of breath and dizzy, and I started wobbling, and I thought, yeah, the medication's making me feel very dizzy. I'm going to say that to the GP, but I know a lot of you guys that watch this are struggling too, and if I can be something that just eases your pain a little bit, that's my job done. You know, the one thing I would desperately like to have is a relationship, you know, with someone I really care about, and been something I've wanted for a long time, but I think I'm confident enough now to do that without alcohol, you know, and I want to be authentic with them. I'm a hopeless romantic. Lots of people are struggling, but at what point does it get easier? I guess it gets easier if we all have each other's backs. That's the one good thing about social media, you know. you guys can reach out to me, and I wouldn't have ever otherwise spoken to you if it wasn't for YouTube and social media. I don't know if they even call YouTube social media, but I guess it is in a way. Rain has stopped, so I think that's a metaphor for something. Metaphor for my video to continue. Check that out behind. Oh. I just appreciate this so much, you know. I really do. Like, I hope you saw my new mate Sammy. If you haven't checked that out, go check it out. Bezies for life. Besties. Just over by the dunes now. Check it out. Yeah, through my life experiences, John Sheehan, a new member of the channel that I'd love to give a shout out to, because you've been very active recently, and Rebel, my one of my top commenters actually, so much appreciated, guys. But John, really appreciate the support, mate. Thank you very much. Also, I was saying to you in the comments that through me actually attempting situations, you know, rather than backing out of them, you know, a lot of people play it safe, don't they? But I've been able to share advice on what worked and what didn't for me. I'm still trying to figure a lot of that out. And a lot of you seem to enjoy watching it, which is great. So even for that reason, you know when you start thinking to yourself, if only I hadn't done this. They say it's the things you don't do in life that you regret, but I've done a lot of things that I do regret, you know, like I've tried a lot. I became a yes man. I've spoken very openly about that because I was terrified of being labelled as boring, you know, or giving in to my autism. That was something, you know, I was very afraid of giving in to it, because it had already taken a huge toll on me and my family, so I didn't want it ruining our lives. You know, it's a part of me, yeah, but it doesn't define who I am. It's a great quote, isn't it? Very cringy as well. I know I'm a cringy bastard. I guess what I'd rather do than people, you know, looking for suffering from other people is to go, a lot of us are suffering. You know, don't judge anyone till you've walked 1,000 miles in their shoes, 1,000,000 miles, whatever. Instead of going, I'm not as bad as that guy. Like, I watched a video from Paul Merson, the English footballer, the Arsenal footballer, really good footballer, midfielder, but lost £7 million sterling through gambling. You know, he got paid great wages and he gambled it all away. And I kind of felt a little bit negative. I kind of felt like, oh well, at least I'm not as bad as that guy. But then I was like, no, fair play to him for opening up, because imagine the shame that I was feeling for gambling, and you know, it's only a fraction of what he gambled, and I feel so much shame. So for him to have the balls to open up about that, it takes great courage. It really does. And because of him, I didn't feel as shameful about my gambling. So you see how honest he was. And if you are struggling with gambling, do look it up, because Paul Merson really helped me to kind of go, look, it could get this bad. I have an addictive personality, and when I'm drinking, I can do all kinds of things, you know. Messy, very messy. Not the footballer. We're talking about football. But you think your situation's bad and somebody else opens up, and again, it's not to go the reverse way of, well, my problems are nothing compared to theirs, but you realise lots of people have messed up very badly, and if they can get over it, so can I. And then if I share my story, they'll realise that they're not as bad as they think they are. There's actually a lot of people like them out there. And that's what we really miss with social media. It's after just, it's like a light bulb moment. But when you're on this thing and you're like, you're not going to post terrible pictures of yourself. or like the only time I've ever posted a picture of me when I was morbidly obese was when I was showing how much weight that I've lost since then, you know. We don't show our vulnerable sides, we show our perfect sides, so then everyone thinks everybody else is flawless, never makes any mistakes, and that's just not true. In real life, people are fucking up all the time, and the more people share those fuck ups, the less people I think are going to start taking their own lives. I feel like that's the only option. At least it's worked for me anyway. And this channel has helped me as much as it's helped you guys. So I hope you all know that you've helped me, every one of you. Because when I started, it was like, who the fuck wants to hear me speaking? But a lot of you do. Which makes me think that I've got a purpose in life, you know, a higher purpose. And that stops me from doing anything drastic. It's kept me on the straight and narrow, and this year times have gotten very dark, you know all about that. Been very messy, you know. A lot of death, a lot of culling of friend groups, a lot of fake friends being sifted out, you know, lost relationships as well, which can leave you feeling very lonely, you know, very lonely. So you gotta have people there, you know, and we all mess up, you know, but we have got to do better. You know, we've all probably done despicable things that we're ashamed of, but we've got to do better. You know, we've got to move on from them. And if we've hurt people, apologise. That's one thing I've learned big time. It's painful to look within and to see how fucked up we are, but we have to admit it to ourselves and others. And then when we go and we admit that, we can get better. It's usually those closest to us that we hurt, isn't it, unfortunately? And that's what nearly took me to the point of ending it all. You know, I just thought, I'm a fucking laughing stock, I'm a joke. My grandparents were alive, to be ashamed of me, and all this really negative, toxic stuff gets that bad, it really does. You know, and to the point where you're dragging yourself into work miserable, you're getting out of bed earlier than you'd like, and going into a job that you hate, going home wrecked, then rinse and repeat, and life just seems so fucking mundane. I want better than that, you know, I really do. We should all strive for better than that. We all deserve it, you know. And I often do think, and I'd say a few of you could relate to this, it's kind of like a weird form of survivor's guilt, but because I've tried to take my own life and have no visible injuries or nothing from it, I often look at people who did die by their own hand and I think to myself, what makes me so special? I often thought that survivor's guilt was a stupid thing. You know, it's like, well, you survived, they didn't. But then it is kind of like, well, yeah, what makes me so special? You know? Any time where I feel hopeless and life is so meaningless, I often think to myself, you should be so fucking grateful that you're still alive with no injuries, because you ran out in front of a fucking car and you jumped in front of it and it stopped and you didn't get hit, nothing bad happened to you. And looking at that video from Chicago made me think to myself, your man got a slight injury, I got nothing, literally nothing. Now I do wish that a doctor had seen me and taken me more seriously. Sometimes I do wish I'd been hospitalised because I was not in a place to make good, reasonable, rational decisions by myself. But I do think, would that have stunted my progress? You know, I've made a lot of progress on my own, and there are dark days, there's always going to be dark days. Like today was not a great day, you know, I was feeling quite miserable, you know, looking at lost relationships, but I got my arse down here to the beach, got in for a swim, finishing a walk and a cycle home, and I'll appreciate the warmth of that fire, the warmth of the blankie, so much more because of it. And I'm grateful for that. Whereas if I'd sat in all day, I'd be like, oh, what a day wasted. Well, I haven't done that now, thank God. Now, that's something I always go back to. You know, I do think God kept me alive. Now, that might seem like I've a God complex or whatever, but to be pissed drunk and as drunk as I was, throwing myself out in front of a car in the outrageous state that I was in. And then not only that, but when the fella got a fright and thought that I was obviously some pisshead trying to have a laugh. That's obviously what it looked like to him. I'm sure if he knew that I tried to kill myself, he wouldn't have been as aggressive, but I got aggressive back, because, you know, you just tried to kill yourself. You don't really care the consequences. When you're depressed, you usually don't have the energy to argue with people. This was a different type of state, you know, mixed mood, maybe you might call it. Or a... would you even describe it? Dysphoric type of manic state, if you like. I had energy, but it was very negative, you know, very anxious energy. But by the grace of God, I survived. You know, I got arrested because I was in an awful state, and I've no charges to my name because it was just drunk and disorderly with a bit of aggressive behaviour. Nothing was severely damaged, including myself, thank God. And I could have been. That's what keeps me going, you know, and in ways I do think, well, I did it to myself, you know, I threw myself out in front of the car, but I wasn't in my right mind, you know. I was thinking, I'm going to do this now, but I didn't think about it rationally, you know, how many people it had hurt. I just thought, I'm going. So as tough as times do get, I'm very lucky to still be here, you know, very lucky. You know, I'm lucky to have not been seriously injured when I was under the influence, when I was... And just to clarify, I've never driven under the influence of alcohol, but I just mean under the influence of alcohol in general. I can barely drive as it is, never mind if I've been drinking. When it comes to that, I'm very safe, very cautious, which is a good thing, and I'm going to keep that, but... if you have lost a lot of friends or people have betrayed you, that's happened a lot, you know, a lot of people have stabbed people in the back, you know, and that's not very nice, especially with family when they do it. Friends as well, you know, and you think you trust people and they rip you off, and that's a hard one. That's a very tough one, isn't it? Yeah, you know, it's hard to have good friends nowadays. But I do think life has to have more meaning in it, you know. It's not just we wake up, we go to work, we pay taxes, and then we die. They're the certainties of life, I guess, but I do believe there's more to life than that. It's been very painful, you know. This year has been quite painful, you know, I won't lie. I've had to look within a lot. I've seen family members for what they really are, and I don't like it, you know. I don't like admitting it. People are like, just cut them out, you know, you're better off. Having to admit how little they actually care is very upsetting. And thinking that if you died, they'd say whatever the right thing was, but they wouldn't genuinely care. Well, maybe they would, maybe that's not fair, but I'm on the mend, you know. I'm 43 days sober, and that's with a lot of days sober in between, I might add, but consistently keeping the flow going. It's not all going to be sunshine and rainbows, of course not, you know. You're gonna have, I think this day is a great metaphor, you're gonna have shitty days like this, but I mean, I'm not letting the weather define how I'm gonna feel. You know, it's Ireland, it's gonna rain. Still got this beautiful beach, you know, and I'm off work, so I've nowhere else I need to be. Though I better get myself home soon for a shower. But no, a big thank you to all you guys who've supported me. You make it all worthwhile, you really do. Because at least I know you're getting something from this, and I can share a problem. You guys reach out as well in the comments, and it really doesn't feel as lonely, you know, and that's genuine. Material things come and go, but like true friendships, I hope, never fade. And that's why I want to grow this channel as much as possible, you know, to try and help as many people as possible. Because it has been something that I felt is really worthwhile. Sharing struggles, it's actually something that I feel we can use social media for as a means of good rather than evil all the time. You know, I'm not going to show you all my successes and none of the failures. I'm going to show you the failures, and believe me, plenty of them. But yeah, before it starts raining again, guys, I better get myself home because I'm out of the water. It's been pissing it raining down. Happy Saturday. I hope you are all well. Let me know how you're getting on. Eventually the weather played ball for this one. Yeah, I'm starting to see rain coming now, and that means the screen is going to go. So I really hope you are all well. Thank you very much, guys. You've been keeping me going this last 2 weeks, especially with my granddad dying, having to face a lot of harsh truths. It's made it easier knowing you guys have my back, so from the bottom of my heart, thanks. And I will leave you with this lovely image of the sea and the sound as well, which just always makes me feel better. Alright, slán go fóill, guys. Bye for now.